Thursday afternoon, no warning, no countdown post building anticipation for days. Asian doll opened up her Instagram stories and just put it out there. She's pregnant with her second child, a boy, due in December. Bump photos followed almost immediately. Then came the parts she hadn't said yet, that she'd been carrying this news quietly for months, that the first trimester wrecked her, that she was relieved to finally stop hiding it. For someone whose entire brand has been built on saying whatever's on her mind, the second she thinks it, sitting on a secret like that for weeks must have taken real discipline. The reveal itself came in pieces over the course of the day. First the photos, then a string of tweets filling in the gaps. She's due in December on her own birthday, and she's already through the worst of the morning sickness. She joked about how brutal those early weeks were, throwing up constantly, dropping weight she didn't plan on losing. Anyone who's been pregnant or watched someone go through it knows that's not an exaggeration for effect. The first trimester genuinely breaks people down, and she wasn't shy about admitting it, broke her down too. By the time she posted, she said she was already settled into the second trimester and feeling steadier, which is usually when people start sharing news they've been sitting on quietly. The worst of the sickness behind them, just enough energy back to actually enjoy telling people. What made this announcement land harder than your average celebrity baby reveal is the math behind it. Her daughter, Milani, was born in September of last year. That puts less than a year between giving birth to her first child and announcing her second pregnancy. The comment sections noticed instantly, and they split into two very different conversations almost in real time. One side showed up with nothing but love. People congratulating her on getting a girl and a boy, calling the news beautiful, wishing her an easy pregnancy this time around. A few framed it as the kind of family balance people dream about, one of each, close enough in age to grow up, basically as twins. The other side couldn't get past the timeline. Comments rolled in, questioning how anyone manages two kids that close together, joking about being exhausted, just reading about it openly, saying they didn't understand the decision. A few people pushed back on the judgment entirely, pointing out that her body, her family, her timeline, none of it is anyone else's business to weigh in on. Somebody else brought up the obvious point that there are bigger things happening in the world to worry about than another woman's pregnancy spacing. That tension didn't resolve itself. It just kept running underneath every new comment that came in, the way these threads usually do. Two arguments happening side by side, neither one actually talking to the other. Both reactions are understandable if you actually sit with them instead of picking a side immediately. Back-to-back pregnancies are physically demanding in ways that don't get talked about enough. The body barely gets to recover before it's doing the whole thing again, hormonally and physically. People who've lived through that have every right to react with concern instead of pure celebration. At the same time, there's something a little uncomfortable about strangers online deciding they know better than a grown woman what her family should look like or how fast it should grow. Both things can be true at once, and the comment section under her announcement proved exactly that. Nobody in those replies actually knows her medical history, her support system, or what conversations she's had with her own doctor. They just know the timeline, and apparently that was enough to form an opinion. This isn't the first time a rapper's pregnancy timeline has turned into a public debate, and it won't be the last. There's a long pattern of female artists getting picked apart for decisions. Male artists rarely face the same scrutiny over how fast they're having kids, how their bodies are bouncing back, whether motherhood is going to slow down their output. Asian Doll has been famous long enough to know that pattern intimately, and posting through it anyway says something about how little patience she has left for managing other people's comfort with her choices. She didn't soften the announcement or get ahead of the criticism by explaining herself in advance. She just told people what was happening and let the reactions land where they landed. It also helps to remember what kind of year she was coming out of before any of this. Between the birth of her first daughter, a hard postpartum stretch, and an engagement, the last 12 months were already packed with the kind of life changes that would overwhelm most people on their own, let alone stacked together. Adding a second pregnancy into that mix doesn't read like recklessness so much as someone moving through a season of her life at full speed, because that's simply the season she's in. Some people build a family gradually, spacing things out over years. Others end up compressing it all into a short, intense window, often without planning it that way on purpose. Both are normal. Only one of them tends to get questioned in real time online. There's a detail in all of this that almost got lost in the noise of people arguing about spacing. Her due date, December, on her own birthday. She actually said it herself, calling it a gift from God. That's not a small coincidence to brush past. Her birthday already carries weight for reasons that go back years. She's been open in the past about how rough that time of year can feel for her, tied up with grief she's carried since King Von died in 2020. The two of them had an on and off relationship before his death, and she's spoken publicly about the depression that followed, about getting tattoos in his memory, about how that loss reshaped how she moves through the world. Watching her now build toward welcoming a son on the exact date that's carried so much weight for her in the past feels like more than coincidence, even if she never frames it that way out loud. Some dates just keep showing up in a person's life whether they ask for it or not, and this one keeps circling back to her no matter what's happening around it. She also got engaged on December 7th, her birthday, again. So now you've got an engagement and a birth, both landing on the same calendar date in back-to-back years. If you wrote that into a script, people would call it heavy-handed, too convenient to be real. But it's just what's actually happening in her life right now, one milestone stacking directly on top of another, all converging on a single date that used to mean something much harder for her. There's a version of this where December stops being the month she dreads and starts being the month that defines the best parts of her life instead. Whether she's consciously building it that way or whether it's simply how the timing fell, the effect is the same either way. It's also worth pointing out how much her relationship with her own birthday has clearly shifted over the years just by watching how she talks about it. There was a stretch where December carried mostly heaviness for her, tangled up with King Von's anniversary and everything that came after his death. Grief doesn't usually announce when it's done with someone, and for a long time, she didn't pretend it was done with her either. Getting engaged on that date last year was the first sign that the month was starting to mean something different. A birth landing on the same date this year pushes that shift even further. It's not that the grief disappears, it's that it stops being the only thing the date is allowed to mean. Right before this pregnancy announcement, she'd also been talking publicly about how rough postpartum was after Milani's birth. Not in vague terms either. She described feeling like she'd hit a low point, feeling like people around her switched up the second they sensed any vulnerability, slowly clawing her way back to feeling like herself. Reading that alongside the new pregnancy news adds a layer most people skip past in their rush to comment on the timeline. She was working through the hardest stretch of new motherhood and carrying a second pregnancy in secret at the same time. That's a lot to hold quietly, while also putting out music and staying visible online the way her career requires. Most people going through a rough postpartum stretch get to do it without an audience. She did it with one, and somehow also managed to keep the biggest part of the story hidden until she was ready. It also says something that she chose to keep this one under wraps for as long as she did. Her first pregnancy was an open book from almost the beginning. She gave fans a tour of the Hello Kitty nursery she built for Milani, documented packing her hospital bag down to the specific brand of cooling pads she bought, joked on camera about not knowing if she'd need a C-section or deliver naturally. Megan Thee Stallion sent her a Louis Vuitton bag with pink straps and a giant teddy bear as a pregnancy gift, the kind of industry support that got plenty of attention on its own. This time, she sat on the news for months before saying a word. That's a real shift in how she's choosing to handle her own story, and it's worth noticing without assuming you know exactly why she made that call. Maybe it was protecting her peace during a hard postpartum stretch. Maybe it was just wanting one thing in her life that belonged only to her for a while before the internet got a vote on it. Either reason tracks. Her boyfriend Jug factors into this too, the same way he did with her first pregnancy. After Milani was born, he posted